Well, good evening where I am. Good morning or good midnight, depending on where you are in the world. Um, my name is Nigel Topping. I'm the high-level climate action champion for COP26, and I'll be joined very shortly by my colleague Gonzalo Munoz, who's the high-level champion for COP25. And it's a real pleasure to be the host for this dialogue. I'd like to welcome everybody wherever you are in the world joining us. I'd like to thank in particular our great partners, the Global Resilient Partnership and the Adrienne Arsh Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center and the Global Center on Adaptation for coming together in a spirit of radical collaboration to set up tonight's dialogue. Um, we've got a simple objective tonight, and that's to get your ideas on how we, in our role as high-level champions for the COP process, can design and launch what we plan to call a race to resilience campaign, or we'd like to say a sister campaign to the already launched and with great momentum race to zero campaign, so that we can figure out how to help all of those great initiatives which are already out there, mobilizing non-state actors, which is the term the UN uses to refer to businesses, investors, cities, states and regions, and other organizations in civil society, how we can design and launch a campaign to really scale up momentum to make a difference to the lives of the billions of people living in vulnerable situations, vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Our our job as high-level champions, our mandate is to raise ambition. So we sometimes joke that our job is to add zeros to people's targets or take decades off them. So you heard me right. I said billions, not millions. That's our mandate, to be ambitious. And we think it's really appropriate given the scale of the challenges that we face. And in fact, one of the really important parts of this dialoguing process is to make sure we're hearing from all the different voices around these challenges. We think, Gonzalo and I, very strongly that it is simply not morally right to allow the predictions of the impacts of climate change to come true. The predictions that 100 million more people could be pushed into extreme poverty by 2030, of course, exacerbated by the COVID combined health and economic crisis, that up to 130 more million people could be pushed into near famine conditions. We think it's unacceptable to let the number of people who lack sufficient water, who lack access to clean water and sanitation, which of course is crucial in the face of climate emergencies, to raise to 5 billion by the year 2050. We think it's unacceptable for millions of people in coastal and river communities to be at risk of being driven from their homes. And there are a host of other things which are not acceptable. So this really has to be a decade of delivery, a decade of action, not just on mitigation, but on resilience. And we feel we're very clear that it's not an either or. We must take action on mitigation, because mitigation in a sense is the first line of defense for resilience, but we also have to adapt to create resilient lives. So we need the race to zero to succeed, and we need to design and launch and ensure that the race for resilience succeeds as well. It's resilience has been a recurring theme throughout the race to zero dialogues these 2 weeks. In fact, thanks to David and Jorge's work with many partners, we've seen resilience woven into at least 30 of the dialogues out of 98 in these 2 weeks. And Gonzalo and I have been really impressed on the content of those dialogues we've been able to join. And I just want to reiterate that we very consciously use the word dialogue, because we're really inviting ourselves and everybody to listen to different perspectives in a spirit of respectful listening, from which can come learning, rather than trying to protect or project one right view. We've already been able to join 4 regional resilience dialogues in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We've got more to come in the new year in other regions, including the Pacific and the Caribbean. And those regional dialogues and the dialogues these 2 weeks have given us some real insights into the priorities for action on resilience. It's been crucial for me, because I don't come from a background working on resilience. I've been really focused in my work on climate in the last 15 years on really industry and mitigation. So I'm on a steep learning curve. But I'm going to hand over to Gonzalo, now, because my WhatsApp message tells me that he's joined. Here he is. Great. The technology works. To share the priorities and the messages from the resilience dialogues we've had so far. So Gonzalo, great to see you, my friend, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Nigel. And well, you're absolutely right. It is absolutely a moral imperative to take action to build the resilience of people in developing countries, especially people living in less developed countries in small island developing states. We're suffering here in Latin America from this hurricane beating in the coast of Colombia. Absolutely never happened before. And who are the ones that are suffering the consequences? Sure, some tourists that had the holidays canceled in Cartagena, but the rest, all of them are people that are the most vulnerable. Let's say the ones that have less responsibility on creating a crisis like the one they're living. So they are the ones not only less responsible for causing the crisis, but yet are the ones most impacted by climate change. We have to continue repeating that, but still not enough. Probably we have to do that much more, because it's not fair, it's not just. It's time to change it, definitely. And we as champions acknowledge that most of our work, most of the climate work has positioned the effort towards mitigation. It's time for resilience. It's time for creating the best communicational tools, the best implemental tools, the best financial tools to be aligned towards the resilience that we require urgently. And in that sense, the dialogues have been extremely rich. It's quite challenging, you can imagine, to summarize them. So of course I'm going to try. By my friend and brother here will help me if I make any mistakes. So please let me go through it. But Nigel, please interrupt me if I say anything wrong. So there are three sets of messages and idea in general, right? The first message is urgency to act now. Right, and acknowledging, as I said before, that we have lost quite a lot of the required time. The dialogue definitely demonstrated that we cannot continue to see mitigation and adaptation as separate. They must be combined to tackle the current and future impacts of climate change. There's no or, it's an and that's something that we have been speaking about very concretely and putting a lot of effort on that. Most of the efforts to tackle climate change have up until now focused on emissions reduction, but climate change has already affected millions of people all over the world and will impact on billions without immediate investment and action on resilience. This needs to change. And of course, that is something that if you contrast that with our capacity of reacting and mobilizing an amazing amount of money due to COVID that is required. I'm not saying not do that, but it shows that we have that capability. It's something that we're not understanding that needs to change, right? The dialogues also highlighted the importance of building urban and rural resilience to improve the lives of people living in slums and to transform our food and agriculture system and the lives of smallholder farmers. And again, if you connect that to the recovery plans due to COVID, there's a huge opportunity on using that money that is changing or creating jobs, many times related to transforming cities or creating new infrastructure or creating opportunities on greening cities or definitely on nature-based solutions. Then you just have to match those two criteria. This also means breaking silos. For example, working with nature to build into our food and water system. The second big message is put people and communities at the center of action. If we are not to leave no one behind, we must give local voices, including women, youth, and marginalized groups, the agency and legitimacy to design and deliver solutions. And I would reinforce something that we've heard a lot: women. Like every time, it's so much related to women being the ones that suffer most of the consequences. Women have the capacity of mobilizing much faster and sometimes much more effectively. The possibility of educating girls as one of the most important things that we can do in order to tackle climate change. So there's a lot about, of course, not only putting people in the center, but sometimes we can also do something else by double clicking on that. This is what we heard loud and clear from the regional resilience dialogues and Race to Zero dialogues. When communities are empowered, they deliver. Something I have seen with my own work with waste speakers in Latin America, where again, have to say it, women waste speakers were much better than men. Underpinning this, we need transform financial mechanism with people at the center of the solutions. We also need innovation from businesses and civil society. I am quite biased as a business person and a farmer, but innovations are led by non-state actors, from non-governmental stakeholders. Governments are crucial as enablers, but not natural innovators. I know that, but that means that we have to create the private-public partnerships in order to set the conditions for the private sector to innovate, and then for the governments, the public sector, to help that to scale. Third big message. Yes,
Gonzalo, just one thought to add. I think we've heard a lot about the kind of asymmetry in terms of vulnerable communities often being the poorer communities, marginalized communities, and sometimes the narrative I think oversimplifies to say that that's only a global South problem, when we have marginalized communities and vulnerable communities in every country in the world. So I think it's just something I noticed. It's one of those narrative traps we have to avoid falling into. Is we mustn't forget that as we've learned under COVID, that the most vulnerable to climate change in every community, including in LA and in the UK, are communities we need to consider when we talk about resilience.
Yeah, and something that also resonated, I remember one of the dialogues, that what means vulnerable to climate change, because it's not only about whether you are living whatever in a coastal zone, but it's about you live in a resort but you're very wealthy. Sure, you are vulnerable to climate change, but the focus should be in those that are not only vulnerable but also are poor, have a lot of necessities, right? So there's something about that is important in terms of managing the language. Absolutely agree. So third big message: reimagine and increase investment into resilience, including under COVID recovery programs, as I mentioned. The dialogues highlighted very well why we need to increase public and private investment into climate resilience at the local level, both to manage the risks of climate change. We heard also about the importance of the need of flexible funding mechanisms to adapt to local priorities. This holds the opportunity to invest in a more prosperous and resilient future in a 1.5 degree world. Again, an opportunity that we will miss if COVID-19 recovery packages don't prioritize adaptation and mitigation. We should not miss the amazing and unique opportunity that this unique or unprecedented crisis is offering. So COVID, despite the devastating impact on people's life, does present us with a once-in-a-lifetime chance to help create this transformation on the social and economic system we need for a safe and prosperous future. So Nigel and I are absolutely determined to play our part in achieving this transformation by mobilizing action on non-state actors. Remember that that's a role, but we are absolutely committed to do so, and the Race to Zero and our planned Race for Resilience campaign. I am now, of course, looking forward to what our speakers' thoughts on our plans for Race for Resilience, to make a difference to billions of people's lives. And it's, as I said, it's our moral duty to mobilize the best effort that we can. We have 12 months ahead working together, and then Nigel continue another 12 months, but you can count on us on really willing to create a big momentum for resilience, having heard from so many people in the ground how urgent all of this is. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce you to Wanjira Matai, the Vice President and Regional Director for Africa at World Resource Institute So Wanjira, over to you to moderate our 3 conversations designed to help our race for resilience.
Well, thank you, Gonzalo, and greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am delighted to be moderating these dialogues today, but here's the truth. Climate change has exposed the inequities and vulnerabilities of our society. We're living in increasingly challenging times. Vulnerable populations facing multiple compound risks, climate change, the pandemic, the economic crisis, and not to mention inequality and injustice. It is easy to feel dire and desperate. But our distinguished speakers today recognize these challenges, and they have a vision and a roadmap for a way forward. We need to seize this moment. We need to look for ways to reduce vulnerabilities to climate change and help our societies become healthier, fairer, and more resilient. And in the long term, be resilient to the multiple shocks they face. And most of all, we have got to fuel this race with the finances it deserves. And here's another thing that's not morally right. Ladies and gentlemen, according to the latest CPI report, a total of more than $500 billion has been mobilized for climate change, and only $30 billion of that has gone to adaptation. 6% for adaptation. This is shockingly low. And this low level of investment signals, unfortunately, the level of importance we have thus far placed on adaptation. And actions do speak louder than words. And so this race for resilience, even as a non-state actor movement, must help catalyze bridging this gap. It has been an honor for my organization, the World Resources Institute, to support the Global Commission on Adaptation as a managing partner. The Commission put forward a bold agenda last year with a set of recommendations that are even more relevant today in the face of the multiple crises we face. We need to bolster the political will to turn these recommendations into action. And doing so is, as we have heard, a human, economic, and environmental imperative. That's why I'm delighted that we have 3 panels today that are very engaging, that will dig deep, so you will not want to miss any of them. So let's get started with our first panel. Why action on resilience is a must, and what actually needs to be done. So I want to thank Johan Rockström, Salim Haq, and Emma Howard-Boyd for joining us. Thank you all, and all of you great champions, as we know, for resilience. We'll jump right in, and we'll start with you, with Dr. Rockström. As the director for the Potsdam Institute for Climate and Impact Research, professor of earth sciences, you are distinguished in the space of adaptation and resilience, especially for your work on planetary boundaries and that framework. Johan, you helped open the Race to Zero dialogues with a focus on the planetary emergency. I think everyone joining this dialogue is convinced of the science. Where we actually lack the knowledge is on what actually needs to be done to build resilience that's transformative. We just heard from our champions, COP26 champions, on their plans for the race to resilience. Now, if you could share very specific actions, Johan, that you think must be part of this campaign, what would you share?
Yeah, thanks, Wanjira, and hello, everyone. And to answer your question, I think it's useful to start by defining resilience in the latest scientific definition. And we define this today as the capacity of societies and ecosystems to deal with shocks and stress, which we know are on the rise as we are in the midst of the turbulence of the Anthropocene, and the ability of systems to deal with stress and shocks and continue to develop. So it's not about resisting change. It's not about bouncing back. It's about living with change. And interestingly, when you look into investments in resilience, it includes both investing in adaptive capacity, but also persistency capacity. The point that Gonzalez referred to earlier, there are some things that we cannot allow to break. We cannot allow the West African monsoon to break down. We cannot allow the Amazon rainforest to break down, and we cannot allow the Greenland ice sheet to break down, because we as people on Earth depend on them. And finally, in situations of crisis, resilience gives and defines the capacity to transform. How do we rise in a crisis to take a new development trajectory away from the threats we're facing? So adaptive capacity, capacity to persist, and capacity to transform are the fundamentals here. And I would like to suggest here, Wanjira, that what we've come to is the following, that mitigation plus adaptation equals resilience, and that our task for the coming race to zero in resilience terms is to invest in zero carbon adaptation. Zero carbon adaptation is the new pathway for any chance of building resilience. And together with Salim Hook and colleagues at the Global Resilience Partnership, we are right now working on the latest synthesis of the investments that are needed to build resilience. And they come in 5 empirically well-established attributes. And number 1 is to really invest in redundancy, to move away from efficiency and optimization to be the only guiding principle for success, and instead recognize the importance of redundancy, of insurance, of having multiple options in the face of turbulence. This is both in social terms, in social networks and agency, but also in terms of biological redundancy in our ecosystems. The second is diversity, to have different sources of livelihoods, to have different sources of knowledge, to have different sources of trust, but also to have different sources of functions in ecosystems. So biological diversity is probably the best way to recover from COVID in a resilient way, because that reduces the risk of zoonotic viral spillovers from habitats to domestic animals to humans. So if you want to avoid a pandemic, you better invest in diversity. The third attribute is connectivity and modularity. We live in a globalized, connected world, which gives us resilience. For example, in food scarcity in one corner in the world, we can buffer that through food surplus in another part of the world. But too much connectivity can lead to a pandemic because of the air travel connectivity in our open societies. This balancing of connectivity is fundamental to resilience. Fourth is what you discussed so openly earlier here, Wanjira, which is on equity and justice, how people and communities must be at the center, because the more distribution of capabilities in society, the stronger societies are and the more resilient they are. And finally, learning. We need to invest in learning. Adaptive learning is fundamental to navigate the turbulence in the Anthropocene. So redundancy, diversity, connectivity, equity and justice, and adaptive learning, we have empirical evidence are the ways to build resilient societies in the face of the rising frequency of shocks and stress in the Anthropocene. So that, Wanjira, I think is the guide, and I wouldn't want to give any blueprint in any sector, because that framing can be used in every sector and must be now scaled everywhere, from food systems to energy to city planning to health. And I think that is quite helpful that resilience science has come so far. Back to you.
Johan, thank you. Brilliant framing that is indeed. And, you know, one of the challenges for this race to resilience is that we have to take that framing and somehow encapsulate it in a goal that's accessible. The race to zero is fortunate. They have a very simple and nice goal, net zero emissions. How do we find a similarly catchy goal, Johan, that captures all of this and gives us a metric that we can all unite around and say, this is our goal for a climate resilient world? Is there one metric, would you say?
I think that's a big ask, Wanjira. And if you ask me as an academic, I think the honest answer is that we have not come that far, that we have that net zero equivalent for resilience in the world. But I think on the other hand, that if we apply a more precautionary approach, and if we apply an equity approach, and if we kind of really embed the rights of all humans to have a chance to navigate the uncertainties in the world of today, then I think zero, which now scientifically applies for climate, should apply also for nature. Zero loss of nature, which builds redundancy and diversity and connectivity and stability as a source for food and energy and life support, could be a valid guiding star also for the race to resilience. So you could say that the race to zero on carbon, but the race to zero on loss of nature. But I also think that there's a third and final zero here, which is on poverty. So have a zero poverty target, a zero nature loss target, and a zero carbon or zero emissions targets, I think together gives us quite a good direction on resilience. It's certainly not fully comprehensive, but it gives us at least the fundamentals.
Great starting point. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Professor Haque, Salim, you have been a champion for increased action on resilience and adaptation for the most vulnerable countries. I've enjoyed your interventions tremendously. And now as Director for International Center for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh, I think people in this dialogue recognize the importance of this, especially for the least developed countries and other vulnerable countries. My question is to the future. Dr. Haque, in 5 years' time, what 3 global transformations would you like to see happen to deliver the sort of resilience we need in LDCs by 2030?
Right. Thank you very much, Wanjari, for that question and for the introduction as well. So I've been working, as you've just noted, for well over 2 decades with the most vulnerable communities in the most vulnerable countries. But as Nigel also pointed out, there are vulnerable communities even in rich countries. So the community-based adaptation or the locally led adaptation world is now a global world. There are many more in poor countries, but they're also in the rich countries as well. So let us not forget them. And in particular, the area that I work on, we used to call it community-based adaptation. We've now expanded the term to locally led adaptation, focusing on the vulnerable communities' own capacities that they have, their knowledge that they have, recognizing that and trying to build on that. And I've been working not just in my country, Bangladesh, but in South Asia more broadly, and across the least developed countries and vulnerable countries in Africa and Asia for many, many years now. So my answer to your question is threefold. Firstly, I would add to Gonzalo's 3 points that he said, women, women, and women. I would add girls and boys. So the subset being the future. Our young people, my students in my university, are as bright and capable as any students anywhere in the world, and they are now becoming champions of resilience to climate change. And in the next 10 years, we plan to become the resilient champions. When I say we, the vulnerable communities, the country of Bangladesh, other least developed countries, we have embarked on a journey. We call it a 10-year journey to resilience. We are no longer focusing on our vulnerability. That's what we used to do. That's last decade's labeling. The new decade is a race to vulnerability by 2030. And we intend to achieve that by investing in people. The most important asset that we have are our young people, girls primarily, and then boys as well. And if we can invest in their education, in their capacities, in their ability to understand the problem and then tackle the problem, which we are doing right now, then I believe that we will achieve this. And in fact, interestingly, another interesting paradigm shift is that we, the vulnerable countries, will achieve it before the rich countries will. Because the rich countries are just waiting and thinking that they're going to get away with it. They're not. They're going to be affected and they are not prepared at all. Whereas we are facing it every single day here and we are overcoming it and we're tackling it and we are coming up with solutions that we can then share with the rest of the world. So in the globalized resilience community, if you like, it's going to be a transfer of knowledge and know-how from the south to the north and not from the north to the south. We know a lot more about survival and resilience in the face of adversity than people in the rich countries do. And they can learn a lot from us. And the final point I'll make is that we have in next year, the 2021 COP, and we are going to be organizing a major conference in January called Gobeshona. Gobeshona is a Bangla word for research, which is focusing on locally led adaptation towards resilience. And as I said, we're embarking on this 10-year journey. We're going to have this meeting every January, and I'd like to invite Gonzalo and Nigel to join us during that period. It's a 4-day-long conference from the 21st to the 24th of January. Used to be a Bangladesh-focused conference, but we're now going global in this kind of format of online virtual world. And we hope to use this as an annual marker to track our progress towards building local resilience. My focus is always very normative on the most vulnerable people. If we are not helping them, then we are not achieving it, in my view.
And Salim, you do a spectacular job of it, because that's exactly what you've talked about. Gobeshna, as you said, research for locally led adaptation. What would you say to the same question I asked Johan? How do we track progress, therefore? What metrics would you use for tracking progress towards resilience?
So I have two answers for you. The first one, to pick up on the question that Nigel raised in terms of the equivalent of the net zero mitigation. I have put forward, and I'm getting a lot of resistance, but I still would like it to be considered, a zero vulnerability to match the zero of mitigation. We may not achieve zero vulnerability, we may not know how to do it, but I'd like us to have a zero vulnerability as a goal, an aspirational goal, to be the equivalent of the zero emissions. On the other hand, in terms of practical dimensions of resilience, my metric is young people becoming resilient and making their own countries resilient. So my students in the university today are going to be the leaders of my country in 10 years' time, and that will be a transformational change in Bangladesh and other least developed countries. We will not recognize what we were now in 10 years' time because of our young people. The young people are our biggest asset. If we invest in them properly, then we will transform the countries into a resilient country by 2030. I really believe that that's very possible.
Great proposals there. Zero vulnerability as a metric. I hope our champions are jotting that down. Emma Howard-Boyd, lovely to see you. Lovely to have you here. You chair the Environment Agency as an ex-officio board member of the Department of Environment, but you are also proudly for us Commissioner of the Global Commission on Adaptation. And we produced, I think, a great report with included a bold agenda for action against several key economic systems. It previewed what the Commission was putting forward during its year of actions. Now, in 10 years' time, what substantive changes or transformations building on this year of action would you like to see that are part of this plan on the Race for Resilience campaign?
It's great to be here this evening, and I'm always carrying around with me my copy of the report, well read and well thumbed through, but within it sits some fantastic framing for this whole discussion around a race to resilience. And I'm really pleased to be part of this event and hear some of the ideas that have been evolving over recent months. And I think one of the things that I want to emphasize right now is that this is very much a whole world issue. And one of the things that I hope I bring to this discussion based in the UK as the UK's Global Commission is that very real live work that we are doing here in England, dealing with too much water and too little water, key aspects of the adaptation and resilience agenda. And I really loved the framing that we heard earlier about zero carbon adaptation. One of the things that I often say, and it's this whole integration of the adaptation and resilience agenda with the net zero agenda is, what is the point of investing in a brand new renewable facility if it washes away in a flood or melts in a heat wave? And we have to learn from the stranded asset agenda that has helped land some of the net zero messaging to really see what we need to be doing, not just in developing countries and emerging economies, but also in developed countries where we are now seeing real live impacts of climate change. So for the next 10 years, for me, it is about moving into action and delivery, and making sure that as we race to net zero, we're embedding the race to resilience in that activity that we all need to take. We know as you drill down below all the themes of adaptation and resilience, it gets incredibly complex. And when I'm looking at UK budgets for infrastructure spend, we see in this country that the flooding budget is a separate line of about £1 billion. This year alone, the UK is due to spend something like 37 billion on infrastructure across a range of different aspects. 20 billion of that is in transport. We need to make sure that that transport is built in a net zero perspective, as well as being resilient and ready for the climate shocks that we're already seeing.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you very much for that. And that's about all the time we have, sadly, for this great panel. But the highlights of what you have shared, this is about living with change. Johan, that was a really important message. And both from Salim and Emma, vulnerability and vulnerable people are all over the planet. We are dealing with vulnerability across the board. And maybe this goal to zero vulnerability, that is a component of zero poverty, zero loss of nature, will start to give us a landing place for what exactly we are measuring. Thank you all so much for your great, inspiring comments today. Thank you. We will move right on. I think we will get our second panel. This is a marathon of 3 panels. And so I am delighted to move right into the next panel, opportunities for ambitious action. This conversation has clearly set out what our overall ambition should be, and that the goal for the race to resilience must be inspirational, must be people-focused, must look across the board at vulnerability. But what does it all mean in practice? Our second conversation is with 3 distinguished guests, Kathy McLeod, Zakia Nazanin, and Karen Sack. Thank you very much. This all-women panel makes me very, very happy. First to you, Kathy. You're the Director and Senior Vice President at the Adrian Asht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center, leading the creation and execution of the center's strategy to achieve its goal of reaching 1 billion people worldwide with resilience solutions. It really is fantastic that the center helped launch the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance just a couple months ago. Share a little bit with us what the ambition is for this alliance and the impacts you expect to deliver.
You bet. Thank you, Wanjira. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning, this afternoon, and this evening, whatever time it is for you. These Zoomathons are where we are right now. And I think it's important to remember our humanity. And we're all seeing in these Zooms each other's families and our pets and all sorts of things that make us all real humans. And I think that's important when we think about a race to resilience. We need to meet people where they are, And that is a theme of the Adrian R. Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. Where are people and what do they need, and how can we partner to help bring resilient solutions? And our definition of resilience is that we help people better prepare for and withstand the challenges of climate change, migration, and human security. And we want you to have new knowledge and new skills and layers of protection over you to withstand and recover from those shocks and stresses. One of those is extreme heat, and not just extreme heat, heat period. And so we look at the world, we know that it's hot, we know it's hotter. We had the hottest decade ever in the our last decade, and projections show that I think the number is 3.5 billion people will be exposed to extreme heat. 1.6 billion of those people will be in dense urban areas. So this is something that we can't ignore, and I think we've left global warming long behind, and we are firmly in global heating. And after a really critical conversation with the Red Cross Climate Center and Martin Van Alst and his colleagues, we were convinced that extreme heat was a place where we could make a difference. And after bringing together a collection of private sector and public sector and finance folks and Red Cross and disaster response expertise in public health and the Rockefeller Foundation and more, we have landed on this alliance focused on a vision of a world without death or loss of livelihood from heat. That's our big vision. And after spending some real time understanding the issues and the science and the gaps, we've arrived at 4 places where we think the most work can be done the most quickly. And I want to underscore, we meet people where they are. We're also in a hurry. We've got to stop talking and start acting. And what does that mean? We have to get real about that. And that measurement, our approach is the 80-20 approach, the Pareto principle. It's good enough. We have enough information. We have enough science. There's plenty of money. Do we have the passion? Do we have the partners? Can we do this? And where can we be most effective right now? And so those 4 areas of work and focus are in reaching decision makers who are directly linked to vulnerable people. Do they have the information they need? Do they understand the risks? What's the best way to communicate with them? And how do they best protect vulnerable people from extreme heat? Secondly, policy. Got to have good policy. Third, risk and finance tools. How much does it cost to have a heat wave? How much does it cost to not respond to it, not get ready for it? We don't have this kind of data that helps us understand what are financial approaches, what are risk transfer approaches that can work. Great examples exist in the African Risk Capacity, in the CRIF. The Insurance Development Forum is working on some of these things. So we've got some real expertise in the group around those issues. The Disaster Protection Center at in London is also a partner. And then lastly, implementation. What works? What does the evidence tell us? We've also formed a science advisory panel with some of the world's best experts in how the human body reacts to heat and how we can think about what are the behavioral parts of this. Sometimes you have all the information you need and you still don't act. Why is that? How do we solve people getting themselves ready for heat coming and understanding what to do? And then lastly, I want to say that these challenges that we have, heat is an exacerbator and heat's the mothership of climate risk. But these things it's climate plus. I mean, COVID has changed everything, and not just COVID as a health impact, but an economic impact. So we have decimated public treasuries. We have biodiversity loss we're doing it with our eyes open. We're doing it to ourselves. We can't live without nature. We've got pollution, air and water and ocean pollution. And so we need to take them all on at one time, and all the solutions have to be multi-purpose. And it's challenging. We can't do it alone. But the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance is a reflection of that approach and bringing all the different voices together. I think the last thing I'll leave you with, because I'd like to talk more about it, perhaps in a future conversation and dialogue, is that we believe that and have launched a separate initiative to name heat waves and rank heat waves around the world the way we have hurricanes and tropical storms and cyclones. We've been naming hurricanes since the 1950s. It creates a culture of preparation, prevention, resources around getting ready. And we believe that naming heat waves can do the same. And we're fired up, pardon the pun, to get it done.
Thank you, Kathy. In fact, in the field of emotional intelligence, they say name it to tame it. So I think you're absolutely right. Thank you so much for that framework, which in many ways challenges us. The level of granularity we need to get to, really, really important. I wonder, Kathy, if you could also reflect on the fact that as an alliance, you've been really good at mobilizing cities and businesses and civil society. The Race to Resilience will have to do the same. We're going to have to mobilize non-state actors. Any tips on how you can make this mobilization a success?
I think the key tip is that you can't do it by yourself. You have to have people in different sectors and different perspectives work together. And you have to align the incentives that people have. And you have to acknowledge that if people aren't paid to wake up every day and do that thing, it's hard for them to do it. And so we really need to understand what people's motivations are, what their incentives are, and get everything aligned so that people are rowing in the same direction. And take the page from the book that is 80% is enough to move ahead. Too many people are suffering. Too many livelihoods are at stake. We now understand some things we didn't before COVID-19. We also understand how incredibly unequal the world is. And so if we lead with solving inequality and we lead with meeting people where they are, we'll find more people at the table that can actually get it done. And you've got to have metrics and you've got to have accountability. Or else it's just talk. And so I think the key thing is bringing people in from all over different aspects of that particular community and knowing who you're talking to and what they want.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Zaki, I want to turn to you because as the program manager at Concern, you've been 12 years working in some of these areas, including climate change adaptation, around gender mainstreaming, and you're also today representing the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance. You're helping 2 million people build resilience to flooding and ensure that $1 billion from public and private sources get to them. Those are amazing, amazing targets. How is the Alliance planning to increase and deliver on this ambition?
Thank you, Ms. Wanjira. Thank you very much. And good morning from Bangladesh. It's 12:47, so very good morning. And thank you. Last year at UN Secretary General's Climate Action Summit, the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance committed to scaling up our work in climate action, including advocating for the generation of an additional 1 billion from public and private sources in climate change, climate smart, risk-informed development for building resilience. We also committed to helping 2 million people to be more resilient to flooding with our programming and advocacy effort. And we have made progress over the last year. For example, includes that Concern Worldwide, a member of the Alliance, has reached to around 19,000 people in Bangladesh to be more resilient to flooding. And yes, we are being as ambitious as possible, considering the scale of climate change crisis. And we're working to significantly scale up our adaptation work with the ambition to help around 4 million people to strengthen their resilience to flooding by 2024. So what do? We work with some of the people who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And from our work, we capture experience and we generate evidence on what is needed to build resilience to climate change, what works and what does not work. We also identify where there are gaps in actions. And we also, most importantly, we ensure that lessons, what we learned from our work, are shared with other actors, with our partners. And most importantly, what we'll do will elevate community voices and research findings with international donors and all level of governments to show why increased investment in flood resilience is urgently needed. You know, we are in the time of climate emergency, so we need to be ambitious and we need to have more collaborative actions to achieve those ambition. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zaki. I have a follow-up question for you, and I love the idea of elevating local voices, because that's exactly how we must build locally led adaptation. You heard from the champions about their plans for the Race for Resilience campaign. What, from your alliance's perspective, will make this campaign a success? What will you be looking for?
Thank you. Great questions. Well, so I want to highlight 3 points here, which are important for a successful campaign. So first, put the people at the heart of the campaign. So for around 15 years, I have been working in Bangladesh with some of the people who are most vulnerable to climate change. So I'm living in Bangladesh, you know. So I learned from them that they know best their risk, and they know what will work to address those risks and what is their own strengths. So it is important that their voices are heard in the campaign, especially those as women, young people, indigenous people, and those living with disabilities, who are very often excluded from discussion and decision making. So important to listen from them, but that is not enough to just giving voice to the needs of the most vulnerable. So the campaign should need to focus on the funding issues. Funding is needed to enable those people to build their resilience, to act on their risk. So we know that there is a huge gap in funding for climate change adaptation. The Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance released analysis on this earlier this year that found that in addition to an overall gap in funding, money is not going to the countries and people that are most vulnerable to climate change. So this campaign should focus on that as well. Secondly, support the learning from our best understanding of the resilience. So to help this, the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance has developed a flood resilience measurement tool for communities. We call it FRMC. So in the first phase of this alliance, we have applied this FRMC tool in 118 communities in 9 different countries. So this tool is built around the notion of 5 types of capital, that is human, social, physical, natural, financial capital. So this tool helped us, the communities and our stakeholders, to understand flood resilience in a much more holistic way, in a broader way. For example, by broadening this perspective of resilience beyond that of physical infrastructure to also include social capital. So what this means for the campaign on resilience to be successful. So it will need to draw on the best available understanding of what works and to ensure adequate focus on some of those harder to quantify core elements of resilience, that is social and human capital. So Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance FRMC tool is a great support here. And finally, what I want to point here is successful campaign needs to be more than just a talking shop. We need to hold ourselves, the other actors, all of us, to be accountable to our commitments that we make, because too many lives and communities around the world depend on it. So these are my 3 suggestions for a successful campaign from our alliance perspective. Thank you. Thank you very much, Manjira.
And a fine list they are, Zakia. Thank you very, very much. We are taking copious notes. This is excellent. Karen, I want to turn to you, because building the resilience of our coastal zones and oceans is an absolute must. What are the ambitions and targets of Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, and what will have changed by 2030?
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join all of you today. And I think, we look at resilience from the ocean looking into land. And Kathy just spoke about heat. We need to remember that the ocean has absorbed around 93% of the heat from our carbon emissions. And so as we think about moving forward, we need to think about some of those impacts. So, by 2050, we're looking at around 800 million people being at risk from storm surge, from extreme weather events. which includes over 570 low-lying coastal cities that will face sea level rise of at least 0.5 meter. And this is costing, already between 10 and $40 billion a year from coastal floods and storm surge. The livelihoods of 10 to 12% of the world's population depend on fisheries and aquaculture, with over 3 billion people worldwide relying on food from the ocean as a significant source of animal protein. So, from coastal communities in least developed countries, small island developing states and other low-lying areas, all are likely to be severely impacted with, as we've discussed from others, women and girls especially hard hit. And we just need to look to the flooding events in the Philippines and Central America this week to know that this isn't a problem for 30 years' time. It's a problem of today. So it's absolutely critical that we collectively focus on these net zero targets, but they have to be combined with efforts to become both what we would say is biodiversity positive, which I know breaks the zero mode, but we need to be biodiversity positive and human-centered, so including biodiversity protection and resilience building in the way that we look at things. The Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance is a growing alliance of private and public sector stakeholders that are tasked to promote cross-sector collaboration, financial innovation and investment, all of which are required to address and mitigate the downstream risks of biodiversity loss and climate change in coastal areas at this intersection of our ocean and land. And we bring together finance and insurance sectors, governments and non-profit organizations and stakeholders from around the world to pioneer the finance and insurance products that can incentivize investment into nature-based solutions with a focus on mitigating risk and building resilience in the regions and communities under threat. We need the key research to underpin that, as well as public and private sector policy, so that we don't separate the ocean and the climate, but we see them as two sides of the same coin. The products that we're looking to develop include mangrove and coral reef insurance, coastal resilience bonds, financial literacy, as well as microinsurance and microfinance products for small-scale fishers and fish workers to enable them to break out of the cycle of debt. And our aim is to surface at least 15 novel finance products by 2025 that incentivize private and blended finance into coastal natural capital, and then to drive at least $500 million of investment into coastal nature-based solutions by 2030.
Great clarity, Karen, and I really, really well said. Now, you have many years of experience working with international NGOs and environmental campaigns. How can our champions use the power of campaigns to make this race for resilience a success?
Well, I think the organizers may worry about asking me this question, and I just want to add to Zakia's 3 suggestions. I'd suggest a fabulous 5 list of things to do, and they include focus, staying the course, empowering action, showing us the money, and recognizing that timing is everything. So I'm going to go through each one of them briefly. So on focus, we really need to remain singularly focused on our goals, think systemically, break out of our silos, and work collectively to drive change. We have to learn from one another and listen most carefully to those that are most often heard the least. The race to zero is absolutely about decarbonization, but at its core, it has to incorporate building the resilience of communities and nature all over the world, and that needs to be our focus. Second, we have to stay the course. As every campaigner knows, what looks like an endpoint is generally just a waypoint towards that end. We've got less than 10 years to drive the significant outcomes we need to achieve if we're going to avoid the critical tipping points that are on the horizon. In the ocean world, needless to say, we say that requires all hands on deck, and it requires significant follow-through. We need all of government commitments that extend beyond election cycles and bridge political differences to stay the course and drive change. Third, we have to empower action. We're hearing a lot of fine words from leaders around the world, talking about the challenges that our world is facing and what needs to be done to tackle them. And this is from both the public and the private sector. And we do cheer when we hear them spoken. It's a signal that change is starting to happen, but it's also just a beginning. These words now need to be followed by the actions required to make them real across every government department, across borders, and across sectors. Fourth, show us the money. There's really no more time to be penny wise and pound foolish or continue to invest in destructive activities. We're faced with the challenge and the opportunity now to build back stronger by both investing in a sustainable future and divesting from an unsustainable past. We will not achieve the strong outcomes with comprehensive targets from either the Biodiversity COP or the Climate COP next year without significant resource mobilization. Developing countries and small island developing states are doing everything they can, and they need to see significant resources on the table from both the public and private sector if we're going to secure their trust and drive forward comprehensive action. And finally, timing is everything. We've just witnessed, hopefully, significant political change in the United States. 2021 is going to see the UK and Italy hosting the Climate COP together, as well as the G7 and the G20 each, respectively. China will be hosting the Biodiversity COP. 2021 is the last best opportunity that we have to drive comprehensive change at this critical moment when we see heating oceans, fires, floods, droughts, famines, deforestation, and extinctions that are so clearly signaling the need for action. So we must make 2021 a super year for nature, for people, and for our planet. Thank you.
Oh, Karen, thank you very much. So clear. We could just frame that and start working. Thank you very much. People know best what the risks are. Let's put them at the center of and at the heart, I like that, of decision making, and genuinely engage them. Funding is needed, and that has come up quite a bit. There is a huge gap. That is the truth. And this cannot be about a talk shop anymore. We do not have much time. And as Karen shared, not adapting can be very, very costly. Thank you so much to the three of you. This has been amazing. It's just great to see the ambition and the practical targets on resilience and adaptation that non-state actors are setting up to help build this resilient world. Nigel and Gonzalo, these ideas here amplify your good work, and they definitely give us ideas for how we move forward. Thank you very much, Karen, Kathy, Zakia. I would like, before we turn to our next panel, there has been some amazing questions coming in from all of you. Thank you for sending them. And we have a Menti survey going on that will be put up in the chat, I believe. Please go in there, click on it, and continue to give us your ideas. This has been tremendous, and we will be harvesting those ideas as we move forward. With that, let's turn to our next conversation, where we have Julio Cordano, Patrick Verheuen, and the Right Honorable Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Thank you so much. And we will hear from them at what it actually takes to deliver on this ambitious agenda. No doubt you have both heard some inspiring words from the panelists before. And I want to start with you, Julio. You head the Department of Climate Change at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Chile. And you're here today also as a representative of the COP25 presidency. First of all, congratulations for such a tremendous job that Chile did and laid such a strong foundation for COP26 and the COPs ahead. I want to ask you what you see as essential steps for delivering a decade of climate action to achieve the sort of resilient world and ambitious ambitions we have for non-state actors. Over to you, Julio.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manjira. I think it's so far, the conversation has been extremely motivating and really it's a great basis to the points I want to make about this, which is precisely the urgency and the importance of making progress in adaptation and resilience right now. And I guess one of the things that really stand out from what we are perceiving in the UNFCCC process and also at the ground level is the fact that adaptation is not something that we need to plan for the future, but is something that is needed now. And this is precisely related to the fact that for many years climate change was a threat to the world. Now it's a reality, and therefore we need not to plan for what the adverse effect of climate change will be, but for the actual effects of climate change are occurring at the moment. And I think the extreme weather event that we're seeing in Central America are a clear example, a tragic example of what we're talking about, and the urgency of strengthening our capabilities and our platforms for climate action in adaptation and resilience are very, very concrete and painfully real for many people. And from the point of view of the UNFCCC, you know that adaptation is a sort of a latecomer. Is an element that only recently was accepted as a major element in the negotiations under the UNFCCC. The Paris Agreement is really recognizing that fact, but it is a recognition of a high level, and the contents of that recognition needs to be developed and in an urgent manner. I guess one of the greatest challenges that we have right now is to precisely to have a unified system under the UNFCCC that sort of mimics, in a way, the way that that mitigation is treated, but also respecting differences between mitigation and adaptation. At the moment, we don't have that unified system, and it would be an absolute, revolution if we did have sort of a platform that allow us sort of a one window shop where we collaborate, we report, and we evaluate and follow up our national efforts. Right now, we have national adaptation plans. We have the adaptation communications that were brought into light by the Paris Agreement, but we also have the transparency system that have a biennial transparency report where you can also include an adaptation and resilience component. You also have the NDCs every 5 years, so it's a widespread system where there is no clarity where adaptation can actually be fit in. So it is very important that as we go forward, we also make life easy for countries and for communities and make sure that we have one space for international cooperation. In that regard, the non-state actors really are essential because one thing is what we can do together at the national level and the international or the multilateral area, but at the grassroots level, at the ground level, is precisely the non-state actors and the communities that can actually make a difference. But probably in many cases, non-state actors and communities will not have the technical capabilities or the financial capabilities to do everything that is needed or is perceived as priority. And this is why the national level and the multilateral level needs to, have a coherence with what is requested from community level. And that is something that we are far behind from in terms of a goal. What we tried to achieve in COP25 in Madrid was precisely to make that have that conversation. And we, for example, we tried to we organized a ministerial meeting of adaptation, which was really the first time in the history of the UNFCCC Convention, where ministers debated on priorities and tasks ahead, and we elevated the conversation towards a more political level, and that was the first time it happened, and we are very fortunate that we have the United Kingdom that is also a champion in adaptation and resilience, and we were working with them in order to give continuity to that conversation, hopefully in a more official manner in COP26. And this is a very difficult task, but at the same time, I think we need to start somewhere, and we need to make a bold decision about making sure that we aim high and we look far in the horizon. And I think the idea of a race to resilience that mimics the race to zero in terms of mitigation is the right way to go, because it really puts us against the wall in terms of, well, what do we need in order to achieve this? And probably we need a number of things. And I really like the point that was made about show us the money. From that perspective, I think it is extremely important that we pair up and we balance the way climate finance is being developed, because recent reports say that the finance for climate change goes 5-1 in favor of mitigation. And that is something that is not only unacceptable from the point of view of the process and the priorities, but also it really needs to make us think, what is needed in order to make that balance happen? What are the incentives for mobilizing funding in order to make this happen? And I think that's a conversation that needs to happen now, because as I was saying at the beginning, climate change is happening now.
Thank you, Julio. Such important points there. And indeed, 5-1, that is startling. I want to ask you another question, but before that, also just recognize how grateful we are to the wonderful country of Chile for giving us such a great champion in Gonzalo. And of course, with Nigel, we have a dynamic duo, and we know that this will be a great race going forward between mitigation and resilience. But given your role, your additional role also in the adaptation committee, what are your thoughts about how the champions as we plan this race for resilience, how we can help mobilize a global agenda that brings at the center the poor and the most marginalized? What must we keep in mind?
Yes, thank you. So absolutely, and we are also very proud of our high-level champion, and I think it's a great job that he's doing, and we are trying to catch up with him because he's such a dynamic person that it's hard to catch up, but we're trying.
Exactly.
So yes, exactly. I think one element that has been already mentioned in the previous panels, and I think it's a spot-on observation, is that adaptation is a bottom-up process. As much as you can say, we will be planning and we need to make sure that we are monitoring and evaluating, the global effort. But at the same time, it doesn't make sense unless you bring in the communities and the community participation. I think if you have that bottom-up approach build up as a strong process of decision-making, I think that will make a whole difference and will ensure the success of any effort. So, and that needs to go from the planning and from the implementation, and to speak about also the evaluation of the success. So participation and bottom-up planning is extremely important and needs to be taken into consideration. The other thing is, make sure that we have a conversation that is complex enough to have both dimensions of emergency, if you want. We have the dimension of emergency of the immediate climate emergency event, like, for example, the one that we are seeing in Central America at the moment. But also you need to look into the emergency of the structural resilience issues. There are some societies that are built around, they are built on certain assumptions and certain, for example, human settlements that are, respond to certain geographical realities. And that's an emergency in itself, even without climate emergency occurring in the immediate future. But that is an exposure that needs to be taken into consideration. So urgency, yes, urgency about what is happening, but also about what can happen in light of what the climate scenarios are telling us in the future. So we need to balance the structural resilience issues versus also the climate emergency that is happening now. And of course, across the board is the issue of poverty eradication and making sure that we go first to people that are most needed. Last element that I want to mention, and this is all, of course, something that the Adaptation Committee has been dealing with and working on. But one important issue is that, we can have a race to resilience, but we need to also to keep in mind that in the UNFCCC process, there is a moment very close nearby in time, which is the global stocktake in 2023, that will be the opportunity to test what are we doing in terms of resilience and adaptation. And we need to prepare for that. I think it's a very useful deadline for us to understand how much action are we taking into account, how much funding are we mobilizing, and how much integration do we have from local communities. So 2023 global stocktake will be an extremely important date for that.
Thank you, Julio. That's great. Thank you very much. Patrick, I want to turn to you, and it's great to see you, and really great to see that we will be working together to advance the Global Commission on Adaptation outcomes, and really looking forward, of course, to the Adaptation Summit on January 25th. So thank you to the government of the Netherlands for that. But I wanted to ask you how you are engaging with non-state actors to ensure greater representation at this summit in January.
Well, thank you so much, Wanjira, for your kind words. And it's not, we already have been working since a year and a half on this Global Commission. And I just want to say also a couple of words, if I may, to Nigel and Gonzalo, about the opening remarks. I mean, Nigel said we're going to launch a sister campaign to the Race to Zero. I think we need to avoid the risk that this becomes a poor cousin campaign, right? The adaptation agenda is still the poor cousin. I think you said it, Wanjira, all the other speakers indicated sort of the risk in the reality which we are today. So speaking first about the campaign, I would urge all of us, but particularly Nigel and Gonzalo, for us to be bold, right? This cannot be a linear process. This has to be a step change in this campaign. I think we also need to be realistic. I mean, as you indicated, Wanjira, you referenced the OECD numbers. If you just look at the G20 recovery package numbers, only 1/5, the same 1/5 is green, right? We're missing here something. And I think this campaign should be focusing on solutions, opportunities, on jobs, on growth. It needs to be a complete paradigm shift. And I mean, that's sort of my aspiration moving forward. Now on your question regarding the summit. I mean, the summit is sort of the offspring of the Global Commission. I mean, Wanjira, you were very involved. I think all the speakers and all the listeners and participants were very involved in the Global Commission in the last 2 years. And what we try to do with the Global Commission is in fact, is to speak to a different audience, right? To finance ministers, to mayors, to government leaders, to CEOs, to make the case why adaptation action is in their self-interest, right? Yes, there is a moral imperative, but there's also a very strong economic imperative, as you also highlighted in your remarks. So in the Global Commission, we made this bold agenda, we put it on the table, and indeed, actions speak louder than words. So in the last year or so, what we have been trying to do is to scale up existing initiatives and to forge new coalitions where they do not exist. I mean, we heard today about this heat coalition. I mean, there are new coalitions being built up. So what is then happening at the summit? It's January 25, that's one. It's virtual, of course. But what is success? Another summit? I mean, we have a summit on December 12. We're going to have a summit on January. Why is this summit important? Well, let me tell you this. I think it's important, but only if it is forcing action. We don't need grandiose statements. We don't need sort of the same commitments rehashed again, being put forward by leaders. We need new and bold initiative. Would it not be great if Kristalina Georgieva of the IMF comes to the summit and would say, you know, as of today, we will change at the IMF our Article 4 reform surveillance process. Would it not be great if at the summit, China comes forward and say, no, we have a new 14th five-year plan and we will focus on adaptation. Would it not be great if Africa comes to the summit and will come with a new initiative on digital climate advisory services? We heard other initiatives today about youth, about locally led action. This summit tries to be sort of the platform where these new initiatives, where existing initiatives will be put to scale. That's sort of success of the summit. I see Anne-Marie here with us. So the summit obviously is not an endpoint, right? I mean, it's just one day where there is a push on adaptation. And what we hope is to give the baton then to the UK to drive this forward into COP26. So I think it's very important to also to realize on your specific question, where are the non-state actors at the summit? Obviously, the summit has a leaders component. Heads of states and government are expected, and I think that's important. Obviously, there is a ministerial dialogue on adaptation. I think this is important in and of itself. But the day, the 24 hours at the summit gives space to specific themes, to specific regions, to showcase not just small little projects, no, transformative, systemic change. That is success at the end of the summit. The summit will end, we hope, with an adaptation action agenda, a decade of change, right? So the ideal format is that there are big initiatives wrapped around in a sort of a transformative decade. And we would then, of course, all build together, folks in this call, but also particularly audiences who are not sort of in the inner circle. Finance ministers, mayors, they need to come to the table and join this initiative. And then with Anne-Marie and others, we hope then to build and keep the drumbeat on adaptation when we drive to 2021.
Patrick, thank you for answering 2 questions even. That's really great. And with that, we pass the baton to Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Thank you so much. Anne-Marie, we welcome you. You previously served as the UK Secretary of State for International Development, but we could not be more proud that you were recently appointed as the UK's international champion for adaptation and resilience. We celebrated more than you know, and that this issue will finally get the attention it deserves. My first question to you is to ask you to tell us about the ambitions, your hopes for this role, and how the COP26 presidency is advancing actions on adaptation and resilience. Welcome, Anne-Marie. You're muted, Anne. There you go.
Technology, it's a wonderful thing. There we go. That's working. Wanjira, thank you for your really kind words. I can't tell you, I'm so honoured to be taking up this new role, which the Prime Minister has asked me to lead, to really help drive this vitally important agenda. As we've heard, so much more needs to be done to set international action on ANR as a really key priority. It's been wonderful to hear the energy and the passion from all the panelists this evening who are bringing their talents and expertise to this challenge. But it's clear that more priority is needed at the centre, and this is why this is the core aim for the COP26 ANR campaign. The campaign is going to encourage greater political ambition, tools, finance, coordination and commitments to support practical action on ANR and to avert, minimise and address loss and damage as it comes to us. There are 3 key focuses in the ANR campaign. First of all, really driving that action on the ground to improve adaptation, and in so doing to be able to address and hopefully to minimise, or even to be able to learn to avert those major climate shock impacts which we know are coming and we are already experiencing. Increasing the amount of and access to adaptation finance. I've heard that from every angle, that that's a really key part of this. And improving protection from climate-related disasters by better tracking and understanding those risks and making sure that finance is pre-arranged. So my role as your COP26 champion is about building international momentum and ambition on ANR. We need to move to action. And climate change is already affecting millions. It's not a threat anymore, as Patrick said. It's here now. So in building towards successful action, I'll be listening both to governments and also to their vulnerable communities themselves to understand the challenges they face and their priorities for action, and considering how policy and action can be tailored to the different circumstances faced by those communities and business, and how it can adapt to changing circumstances. Engaging with donor countries to increase their support for ANR through those bilateral commitments and knowledge sharing. Working with those who've signed the UN Climate Action Summit's call for action to turn those ambitious political commitments into on-the-ground action, and encouraging support and action on ANR from non-state actors, businesses, investors, cities and civil society. And that's why I see the plans to mobilise these actors as so vitally important, so that we can really shift the dial on this.
Really great to see those three bold agendas, and quite frankly, Anne-Marie, that touch on exactly the issues we need to. Closer to home for me, I know it's early days, but what legacy would you like to help create for the COP27 African presidency on adaptation and resilience?
That is planning ahead. Good question, Wanjira. I think Africa is the continent least responsible for global emissions, but of course, most highly vulnerable to so many of the climate shocks. So improving adaptation and building resilience to climate impacts is a priority for Africa, and therefore a priority for COP26. Africa's leading the way through the African Adaptation Initiative, an involvement in LDC Initiative for Effective Adaptation and Resilience, the LIFE AR. I think that's a rather nice mnemonic. We want to work really closely with the African nations on the ANR campaign to drive forward that action and support on this agenda ahead of COP26 and then through to COP27. So as part of the COP26 presidency, we're prioritising access to finance. We're working to improve accessibility from all sources, including the MDBs and the UNFCCC funds, through simplifying access procedures and addressing the capacity of recipients, because we know that effective capacity building is essential to help parties take climate action. So we're committed to working with key partners to support capacity building efforts as the incoming COP26 presidency. And we must build real climate and nature partnerships with African countries to ensure a legacy for COP26, progress those mutual priority areas through to COP27, and to look for further investment opportunities following the Africa Investment Summit earlier in the year.
Great, and I'm going to try and squeeze in a third question for you because we want to hear more. The COP26 presidency and that agenda you know really well, and of course the champions driving their agenda to increase the action and support on all of these adaptation and resilience issues. And then we have the Race for Resilience campaign that's starting. What are the areas of ambition, Anne-Marie, and actions that you would like to see from all of these stakeholders?
Wanjira, it's really excellent that the high-level champions are mobilising businesses, investors and civil society on this agenda. And I want to challenge our champions to be as ambitious as they can be. It's really in those really important areas to mobilise non-state actors on ANR. So that's working with businesses and farmers to help make food and agriculture value chains resilient, working with private investors so that the trillions of investments into infrastructure and services are resilient and low carbon, working with cities, large and small, so that they take action to take the 1 billion people living in slums out of poverty. And really importantly, working with insurance companies to provide people impacted by climate shocks with access to insurance as part of wider efforts to improve preparedness for and response to disasters. This isn't just about the private sector and civil society alone. Successful action and high ambition is reliant on collaboration across all scales and sectors. We must encourage countries, the private sector, donors, funds and NGOs to work together. So I'm really looking forward to working closely with the champions as they develop the plans for the Race for Resilience campaign and to identifying those opportunities for collaboration between state and non-state actors in this vital space as we look to deliver practical change on the ground. Wanjira, this evening's panels have been wonderful for me to participate in and to hear from so many passionate and expert non-state actors. I take away what I would like to become the narrative, I think, which will spur us all on, that our children are the future. If that's at the forefront of all our thinking, I think we can conquer this. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you in the next 12 months up to COP26 and welcome all the opportunities I can to learn from and listen to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, and you will have our full support. As a proud friend of COP26, I look forward to working with you. Thank you, everybody, for these powerful insights. That's all the time we have. It has been terrific. We must use these insights to transform how we understand, plan, finance, and respond to climate risks in a world where the most vulnerable face multiple risks. We must, and as I said in the beginning of the session, we must strengthen political will to turn our bold visions into action. Now, to support the continued drumbeat and to lead up to the Race to Resilience campaign, the Ambition Summit, the Climate Adaptation Summit, WRI, in support of the Global Commission on Adaptation, will host Adaptation Week from 30th November to 4th December. Look out for the details that will be shared by Nate in the chat. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not know any other issue that unites the South and the North around climate change like adaptation and resilience. This is the issue of the moment. And our panelists have given us great direction and great inspiration. Dealing with these impacts is the most important part of the climate change agenda around the planet. And we know that we have to deal with it as our number one priority. And vulnerable communities are facing significant losses and damages. So how the rest of the world helps them address this issue is, as we have heard, a moral imperative. Nigel and Gonzalo, this is a great opportunity to take this dialogue forward and to continue the support for the Race to Resilience campaign and the ambitious outcomes, the non-state actors and the summit and through to COP26. Over to you for your reflections and to close this amazing dialogue. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Wanjira, to you for keeping the flow going. I think we could go for another couple of hours. It's really fantastic and so helpful, and actually really inspiring and emboldening. No one has told us to go slower. So as I say, most of the time we're trying to push other people, but I feel like you're all pushing us. So, okay, challenge taken. We're up for it. I want to also particularly thank Zakia and Salim. It's like 1:30 in the morning or something crazy for them, and they've been fully engaged. So thank you so much for that. Let me just whistle through a few thoughts, and then I'll hand over to Gonzalo to wrap up. Johan, I love your bringing together the nature and poverty. So zero loss of nature, zero poverty. How can we really sort of simplify the framing? Salim, I think your emphasis on moving the narrative from vulnerability to the end, to resilience as the goal, rather than what we're moving away from, to flip it from a less negative to moving towards a positive, and your particular focus and the confidence which you place in youth, which is really great. And Emma, I think similarly, 10 years of action. I think that's really clear. This is not about COP26. This is about 10 years of action. And I know Emma didn't get a chance to answer the second question, but she put a comment in there about the importance of the UK's recent announcement of a green sovereign bond, and trying to make sure that there's more of those around the world, and that they address adaptation and resilience, not just mitigation. On the second panel, Kathy, first of all, the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance sounds like a really great focused initiative for us to engage with, and I loved your practicality of following 80-20, so we don't always try and cover everything and be perfect, but that's one of the things I think which allows us to really be in action. Zakia, loud and clear, people first, particularly women, youth, indigenous, disabled, and funding issues. One thing I have to say on funding, I think we need to make sure we focus on the full capital stack, not just MDB funds. 100 billion is important, as I said at the start, but it's not going to solve it. We need to look at what's the problem, what's the solution, and then where does all the money come from, and then how can the multilateral and bilateral money unlock other sources. Karen, I like the simplicity of biodiversity positive and human centric, as well as lots of your advice on how to structure campaigns. Julio, again, action now. Yes, it's a race. That's why we want to use this sort of sense of urgency and really be about accelerating. I also think it's worth saying, in terms of a unified approach, I know you were talking about the sort of the actual structure of the UN context. I think we should avoid assuming that. I think it's another framing question. Sometimes I think when we talk about adaptation and resilience, we can end up telling a story that says it's so hard, it's so complicated. It's a little bit like on the mitigation side, we used to talk about the hard to abate sectors, steel, shipping, etc. And that framing basically meant we can't be in action because it's so hard. So I think we should also say that mitigation isn't unified. I mean, the approach to food and land is totally different to the approach to shipping, is totally different to the approach to buildings. So let's not create a framing of complexity which trips us up. I think that we do need to simplify the framing, but I don't think that we've got a unified framing and mitigation, so it's worth just remembering that. And then, yeah, Julio, I understand your point about keeping up with Gonzalo. Actually, it's kind of fun. Part of the race is just me and Gonzalo kind of trying to keep up with each other. One of the fun things is we're totally mission oriented, right? Which means that we don't trip up over ego and institutional petty issues. And so I find that Gonzalo and I are able to work really fast. And one thing we're really keen to do is find a way of enshrining that commitment to mission in the future of the Marrakesh Partnership, which we've been mandated to do in the COP25 decisions. And Patrick, I don't know if you missed my point at the beginning about the sister campaign. The whole point is to raise resilience to be of equal stat. That's why we call it a sister campaign, not an orphan campaign or a poor brother campaign. Sister campaign. So yes, totally agree. Needs to be much more elevated, and I know that you'll help us with that, and amazing work you're doing with GCA, and we're really looking forward to partnering with you and helping scale up and amplify the ambition that you're bringing to the 25th of January and beyond, and really looking forward to making sure we're converging around the adaptation action agenda. And finally, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, look, I know everyone thinks that we're all joined up. We haven't met yet because Anne-Marie's just been appointed. I'm really great to hear your remarks, Anne-Marie. Really looking forward to working with you. Delighted that you've been appointed to really spearhead the UK government's focus on adaptation and resilience. And yes, Gonzalo and I often talk about the ambition loop. It's not about non-state actors only. It's not about national governments only. It's about the way that they work together and can positively reinforce each other. So really energized by the campaign. Even after a long day, I'm full of energy. Thank you, everybody. Gonzalo, what did I miss?
Thanks so much, my friend. And first of all, I would like to thank as well to Wanjira, great moderation, and thanks also for your lovely words. We are, I think I'm speaking on behalf of Nigel and myself, we are not only thankful, but we feel privileged for having the most amazing job. And in that sense, Julio also knows very well there's so much that I've learned from him since day one. So of course, happy to answer and follow any call coming from you, my friend. And Marie, so good to meet you. I didn't know that also Nigel was meeting you. Please let us know if you feel we're not being as ambitious as we can in any time. We want to work with you to move the needle. That's what we're here for. I just want to close with some very concrete messages. We are in a race that's our mood against time, against ourselves, to build a resilient 1.5 degree world where we all thrive in the face of a climate risk and uncertainty and change. We know that building resilience also means halting climate change to reduce its impact on the planet, and especially on the poor and most vulnerable who have not caused it. We want all businesses, investors, and other non-state actors to join the Race to Zero campaign and hope do the same effort with Race for Resilience. We know we won't reach the 1.5 resilient world without equal attention on resilience. And I would reinforce what Nigel was telling you, Patrick, not the poor brother or sister campaign, equal importance. That's a commitment. So record that. You will be hearing that all the time. What Nigel and I have heard today confirmed that we're on the right track to develop a Race for Resilience campaign as a sister to Race to Zero. So we're extremely thankful for the support that we're listening from all of you. We're pleased to confirm that we will launch a Race for Resilience campaign to mobilize non-state actors to help build the resilience of millions, if not billions of people. As always, standing on giant shoulders is not something that we're inventing from nothing. We're working with all of you, working with all the things that have been done for so long. And we will use what we've heard during the dialogue to finalize our plans. If you are all interested in knowing more about the plans, please fill in your details in the form on the Mentimeter. I believe the link is in the chat box. So many thanks to everyone, and happy to close this dialogue. Before closing the dialogue, I want to give our thanks to our excellent moderator, Wanjira. Thank you, all of our speakers and the organizers, Adrienne Arch Rockefeller Foundation, Resilience Center, the Global Resilience Partnership, and the Global Center on Adaptation. Let me also name check Anastasia and Nidhi, who did all the hard work. Thanks so much. We know that many times the ones that take the hardest part are the ones that are not necessarily on the screen. So thanks for that, Anastasia and Nidhi. Many thanks, of course, and please join Race to Zero dialogues tomorrow and the closing sessions on Thursday. We are thrilled to see how much of this is gaining momentum. We are expecting to create the same type of momentum on Race for Resilience. Not poor sister, not poor brother, same type of momentum. Thank you very much. Stay well. See you tomorrow.